Let's continue talking about services. One thing I didn't mention in part one that some people are curious about is what's the difference between stopping a service and pausing a service? Isn't it the same thing? If you're pausing it, aren't you stopping it? Well, yes and no. The thing is that pausing it doesn't clear everything out. I don't think you can pause the print service, but that would be a good example. Let's say you want to leave everything, all of the jobs in the print queue. Pausing it would leave all the jobs in the print queue. Stopping it would take them all out. So it's just stopping it without clearing out all the cache. So that's the difference between stopping and pausing. Another thing that comes up sometimes and could show up on the MTA, although I'm not sure that it will, is how to use the command line in PowerShell to stop and start services. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to type CMD to bring up the command prompt. You would need the admin version of this. So I'm going to right click and go to run as administrator. And for this I would go net stop and then the name of the service. Let's take this print spooler, net stop spooler, and it says the print spooler service was stopped successfully. Net start spooler, and it started successfully. Now you say, well, wait a minute, how come you called it spooler, not print spooler? Because it said print spooler here in the services. Let's take a look at print spooler here. I'm going to go ahead and click on that and go to properties, and you'll see the actual service name here is spooler. Just in the interface here it's called print spooler. The display name is print spooler, but the actual name is spooler. What about PowerShell? Let's go to that. Microsoft has more and more required knowledge of PowerShell in all of its certifications. So I'm going to go to PowerShell, and again I'm going to right click on that and say run as administrator, and let's wait for the interface to come up. Stop dash service spooler, and then start service spooler, and that's how we start and stop the service in PowerShell. All right, the next thing I want to take up is dependencies. So let's right click a service and go down to properties, and you'll see we have a tab called dependencies. The top box here are all of the it says this service depends on the following system components. In other words, these system components have to be running in order for this service to run. Now notice it doesn't say this service depends on the following services to run. That's because these are not necessarily services. These are other system components as well as services. So just know that this doesn't necessarily mean other services. And then down here, the following system components depend on this service. In other words, if this service isn't running, these system components will not run correctly. Finally, I want to look at something called service accounts. And you'll notice I have three different logon as sitting over here. I've got logon as local system, logon as local service, and then logon as network service. First of all, let's take a look at local system. I'm just going to right click on this, go down to properties, and over to the logon tab. Notice that this says logon as local system account. Now this one's grayed out because it's being controlled by Windows. Let's find another one to see if I can find one that is optional. There we go. Logon as local system account. The local system account is the same as we might see when we go to, let's go to a folder here. Let's go to the Windows folder and go down to Properties and then Security. And you'll see this system account. The system is a logon group that the computer uses that has access over everything on the system. In other words, it's like a user that is a super user that's even bigger and better than the administrator. And that is the account, in this case, that has control, oops, that's not what I wanted to do, that has control over this particular service. And in many cases, that is the account that has the greatest control over the services. Other times, we have a service account that has control that doesn't have necessarily control over everything. In some cases, we don't want that system to have control over everything. And so we might give that to a special service account. And we might even make our own special account. So I could create an account on the system. I could go to my server manager here and go down to Tools and Computer Manager, and then down to Local Users and Groups, and create a new user, and I will call this my XYZ service account, and I'll just call it XYZ service account here. Give it a really long, complex password like that. And in this case, I would say user cannot change password. That's good security in this case. I don't want anybody to be able to change that password. And then I would also say password never expires, because if it ever expired, then suddenly those services that I would have running under this would suddenly stop working. And so then I would go ahead and create that account. And I didn't give it a password complexity, proper password complexity rule. So let's try that again. There. Now that one should be better. There. Now, I now have a service account, and I could run the services under that account, and I would have a nice secure password. The other thing I want to do is make sure that I don't run anything else under that account. And I also want to make sure that I only run one service with that account, and I would make another account for another service. That way, if it ever was compromised, then there would only be one thing that person would have access to that one service that person would have access to. So that's how service accounts could be used. They would give us very tight control over who has access to that service. And so that's how service accounts are used. Remember that services, just like files and folders, can be controlled by a specific individual or a specific group. Any entity that can control a file or a folder can also control a service on the system.